Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks for tuning in. For those that don't know me, my name is Damien, and I'm a software consultant with Embarcadero. I'm based in sunny Sydney. It's kind of sunny at the moment. We had a pretty epic downpour last night, but at the moment it's pretty sunny. So I just want to make sure. G'day, Zane. How are you? It sounds like everyone can hear me. If someone could just use their GoToWebinar control panel and just throw in like a little question to make sure that you can hear me okay. Fantastic. Everything is good. That's great. We will be recording this session as well, so we will make the recording available afterwards also. So welcome. A bit about Android development with Delphi. This was a really fun topic to put together. We did this workshop 2 weeks ago. We ran one in Melbourne and we ran one over in Auckland. It was really well attended. And so we decided we'd put it together as a webinar. Now it's a little bit difficult to sort of do a 3-hour webinar. So what we're going to do is sort of split it out into 3 sections, and we'll do another one in 2 weeks' time, and then we'll finish up with a third one as well. But really, you know, I'll make all the source code available, the Prezzo available, and things like that as well. So to get started and to cover off, this is the entire agenda. This is what we went through in that sort of half-day workshop. We covered off configuring your environment for Android development and having a look at the app that we built, something called Check Me In. We then covered off user interface development and user interface design. So what are sort of some of the common components and useful components you can use for standard UI design? But what are some of the new components that are available as well, and how can they help? So we'll talk to those points. And that's effectively what I wanted to try to cover off today. We'll build through most of the user interface, but then I'll show you sort of the finished product as well. So you can sort of see the process or the thought process behind me putting this UI together in this particular way, and then show it to you as a finished product and how it's implemented in the app itself. In our following session, we'll cover off the EMS, the Enterprise Mobility Services. The EMS was something that was introduced in XE7. In XE8, we beefed it out with notification support. So we'll show you how you sort of build all that and integrate it to Google Cloud Messaging. And then we'll write a number of interfaces for REST that our app will consume. And then we'll finish off the event, the workshop, with covering off some native Android API development. Most of the RTL will support a lot of the in-depth features of Android, but there are some things that we don't quite cover off yet. And thankfully, there are many ways that we are able to get in underneath the Android operating system and actually make calls directly to it. So I wanted to show you an example of how we actually go and get the contacts and store those in a list box. We'll also cover off app analytics in that third one. Don't mind all the sirens, and we'll cover off deployment as well. So today we'll focus in on the user interface development and design and a little bit of the app itself, Check Me In. All right. Again, please, as we're going through the event, use your Q&A log in there to log questions. Periodically, I'll go in and check them. I'll also hang about online for a little bit and make sure we answer all the questions as we're going through. Good question, Nick. So if I'm breaking this into 3 webinars, will the link for this one cover all 3? I believe it does. I'll just check with our marketing team, and if not, I'll send it out to this list directly again, so you've got access to that link as well. All right. So let's talk about environment configuration and Check Me In. So one of the nice things that when we're doing Android development is there isn't a great deal more to set up compared to when we do our iOS development. You know, I'm going to start with RAD Studio XE8 Update 1. But again, from an Android development point of view, if you've got XE5 Enterprise and above, or you've got XE5 with the mobile add-on pack, you can start doing Android development today. I'm using Update 1. There was a number of issues that were fixed for the EMS in particular that I was interested in sort of pulling down, but XE8 is good as well. And everything we're doing today is in Delphi, but everything I'm going to show you today you can also do in C++ Builder as well. The other important thing to point out here is we don't need any Mac hardware like we do with iOS development. You can do everything on the one virtual machine or on the one desktop, being completely Windows based, 32 or 64-bit. There's no problem with that whatsoever. You'll also need to get an Android developer account, and you can just go to developer.android.com to go ahead and create that account. The big difference here, compared to iOS. iOS developer accounts, when you're actually sort of going right through the process of deployment, it's about $100 per annum, factoring in sort of fluctuation in exchange rates and so forth. The Android developer account, and it is free to start with if you're just doing some development and testing to devices. But when you are ready to start deploying to, say, the Google Play Store or things like that, it's a one-off cost of $25 US. So it's quite cheap and quite easy to get into as well. So we just go ahead and create that Android developer account. You'll also need I'm using a virtual machine for my development. I try and keep the host operating system relatively clean, and I create a number of virtual machines. If you're interested in trying to know more about virtual machine libraries, I encourage you to go and speak to Lachlan Gemmell, one of our MVPs and a VM aficionado. He's got a whole bunch of VMs set up and deals with updates and so forth. It's really quite interesting. I'm running Windows 7 purely for the fact that I don't like Windows 8.1. And I'm running a 64-bit VM as well. I'm also in this particular instance using version control. It was really interesting when Jim McKeith came out to give me a hand with the XC8 launch event. We just asked a question. We actually asked two questions during it. We asked about unit testing. We asked about version control, who's using it and who's doing it. And less than 50% of the attendees had put their hand up to either of those. And I certainly wanted to encourage you that something like version control, it's not a very difficult barrier to entry to get started with version control. Again, depending on the projects you're using or testing it out on, one thing I can encourage you to do is have a look at CloudForge. CloudForge is a cloud-based subversion repository that you can go and create your own account for and access. So if you want to test out CloudForge, I certainly encourage you to do that. The IDE and RAD Studio itself also supports Git and Mercurial. So you can also use those distributed version control systems also. Matthias is online, and he's certainly a big user of Git, I believe, and he can certainly point you out to those things as well. So I'm just using the subversion via CloudForge. In fact, the link that I'll be sending out later on for my code is all up there on that SVN account. And finally, Android devices. In this situation, I would encourage you to get an Android device for your development purposes. Under iOS, certainly for the majority of your development, using the simulator is very, very good. It's very quick, in fact. But on the Android environment, the emulator is extremely slow, and personally I find very painful. And again, I've spoken to a number of Android developers, not just Delphi developers, but guys that are doing Java. All of them get a device and use a device directly and never use the emulator. You can jump on eBay and grab a cheap device for less than $50 and get up and running. I've nicked one from my brother-in-law just to do some testing as well. So I certainly encourage you from a development point of view to go directly to device as opposed to using the emulator. Now, operating systems as well. We've had some significant changes since XE5. But the versions we now support are basically Ice Cream Sandwich and above. So basically 4.03 all the way up to OS 5. The development I'll be using is on a Samsung S2, so something that's relatively old. I think it came with Android 2 on it. It took me about an hour to get everything upgraded with the device itself to get it up to Lollipop, and it was relatively painless. So again, some of these older devices, you can simply just upgrade the operating system and you can get up and running pretty quickly as well. So that's the first part of environment configuration. Obviously RAD Studio, XE5 to begin with, but I certainly encourage you to look at XE8. Getting an Android developer account from developer.android.com. I'm using a VM with Windows 7, but certainly straight to your Windows operating system or another VM is completely acceptable. Version control is an option, but a good option to use. And then making sure you got one of these devices, again, is a great way of working. So I think I've just got a couple of questions here. Lachlan Gemmell, El Presidente of ADUG, Gemmell. Really, and one of our MVPs, really good guy to have a chat with. Cool. Just a quick check-in. How's the pace, guys? Is this okay? Just throwing up a little question up there will be quite sufficient. While I chug down my coffee. Fantastic. Good. Can be faster. All right, Matthias, I'll get into it, mate. So, Android SDK and NDK. As part of the RAD Studio installation, we do give you the SDK and the NDK, and you can choose to install that. If you've already got your own, you simply uncheck that during the installation. Now, regardless if you grab it from us or from third party, there are some additional pieces that you will need to download as part of that. So after you complete your install of RAD Studio and you've got your SDKs installed, you'll need to open up the SDK Manager. And you can go and grab the SDK Manager just directly from the RAD Studio folder. So that's where mine is, under RAD Studio XE8. I can come down, actually no, it's not hiding in there. Under samples, I can go off to grab it. Typically, it'll be installed under users, your direct user, under documents normally, and it'll be sitting somewhere under Embarcadero and Studio. I've put mine under my work folder, he says. Don't you love it when you move stuff? Actually, you know what? I'll tell you where I've put it. Under my tools and options. And if I go under my SDK manager, and we go under here, see users public documents. It's under the public guy. So under users, under public documents, Embarcadero, Studio, 16, platform SDKs. Here is where you'll find those two SDKs. And under here, you'll have something called the SDK Manager. So we kick that guy off and make sure we just download sort of the updated libraries that are required. What you'll need to do after that is you'll need to jump into RAD Studio and you'll just need to configure these additional properties. So the SDK base path, the zipper line location, Android location, the ADB or the Android debugger, the AAPT location, and also defining your SDK API level location. So these are just simply pointing to the paths that you've simply set up by running the SDK manager for that, and then you're good to go. Another question? Absolutely, Chris. We'll make sure the slides are available. When I mean slides, I mean PDF. So no problems. Cool. You'll also need a mobile device driver. Now I'm using Samsung, so what I thought I would do is go and grab Samsung Keys or Samsung Kais. I'm sure I've offended 50% of the Android population by saying that, but basically that is their client software, and part of their client software, it contains the drivers themselves. I find that quite useful than just installing the drivers on their own, because if for whatever reason I can't find it in Windows Explorer, I can at least do some testing inside this Keys software to make sure it can see my phone. And then from there I can sort of troubleshoot backwards and find out what's going on. So I know that HTC have got their own client software. For the Nexus, it's typically just the device driver, and you can pull that down as part of the SDK manager within Android itself as well. So just have a look at the device drivers that are required. Now, OpenSSL isn't directly needed right now, but when we're starting to work with the EMS and start using our RESTful services, we'll need that over on Windows. So you've got two options here. You can either go and download the source code and rebuild it for Windows 32 or 64-bit, or we have a convenient link on our website or the DocWiki, that will take you through to an installer for the OpenSSL libraries. So go and grab those also. Now, at this point, we've got everything that's required, but we may want to just check whether or not the device that we're using will actually run a FireMonkey app. Most modern phones now for Android don't typically have this problem, but phones that are sort of 5 or 6 years old, there were a number of problems with them. In particular, they didn't have something called the Neon instruction set, and we need that for some of our graphics rendering with FireMonkey. So how do you know if your device is available for Android development? The really easy way to do it is to go and grab this little app called SysCheck, SYS Check. off the Google Play Store. It's a free download, and I'm just going to bring that up now as well. So let's make my screen active here. Okay, so here's my my Nexus 7. I'm just going to go over to apps, and what I've got is I've got this little guy here called SysCheck. Okay, that's the one I've downloaded. And if I just run SysCheck, it will basically run through and give me a list of everything that this device has and effectively whether or not it will actually support something. So the important stuff there is the Neon instruction set that's supported, ARM v7, obviously that's the chipset we target, and then a whole bunch of other acronyms which are kind of important as well. So if you've got green yeses to all of that, then giddy up, you're ready to do Android development. So again, on our DocWiki page, and also on our in our data sheet, we have some phones that are supported as well. So it's definitely worth having a look at. So pull down SysCheck from the Google Play Store, and you'll be able to see whether or not your device is supported for FireMonkey development. Yep, absolutely. You can grab those device drivers from Samsung directly as well. That's absolutely right. There's a straight install as well for those that are using Samsung. You don't need keys or KEIS. You can just pull down the device drivers and install those directly as well. Some other sort of little tidbits which are quite useful. Inkscape. Inkscape is free. That is actually effectively a free Photoshop tool. It's really great for editing images and icons, because when we're doing our mobile development for Android in particular, we have buckets of icons. So it's a really good utility to use. Being open source, there's a really collaborative community out there with plenty of YouTube videos and tutorials on how to get the most out of Inkscape, because it is quite a powerful tool. So that's something worth using. Now, some of the other things I've got there are 7-zip, Chrome, Adobe, and Premium Styles. Premium Styles we're going to use later on to sort of spruce the app up and make it look a little bit nicer. But generally everything else we've got there is good to go. So again, to sort of show you there's nothing up my sleeve, I'll just jump into Control Panel into Programs, and we'll just go and have a look at the programs that I've got installed here. Unfortunately, I've had to go and put on here Citrix as well, and GoToMeeting, because that's sort of part of this web presentation we've got. But everything else here is basically all that is required to start my Android development. So it's pretty straightforward and pretty easy to set up. All right, so that's our environment created. Now what I wanted to talk about quickly was Check Me In. This is the app that we're going to sort of look at, and we're going to develop the components of this over the next sort of 3 sessions. It was really difficult to sort of find an app that helps me show you some really good best practices for doing mobile development, to showcase new features, and something that we can cover off in a short space of time. So I built something called Check Me In. Effectively what I've done is I've pinched the check-in stuff out of Facebook. But I think it's kind of cool, and it does showcase a bunch of capability, which is kind of useful. But basically what Check Me In is it's a multi-tiered system. So it makes use of the EMS for REST services. It uses some of the new visual components that FireMonkey provide, but also some of the standard development paradigms we should make use of when we're doing our mobile development. Basically what users can do is they can log in to the Check Me In server, and they can share their current location. So again, I'd like to say out loud, this is not a stalking app. Okay, you are putting your position up there of your own volition. Okay, so the idea here is that you can share it. We use a geolocation sensor to grab your lat and long and then publish that. You have friends that you can then see what they've currently logged, and you can view their current positions using the interactive map, which is basically defined as T-Map View. You can invite friends to join. That basically just goes through your contacts on your phone and then sends them an email via just Indie SMTP. You can see a history of your locations, and the architecture is based around Interbase as the backend database, the EMS as the app server that's managing sort of the server side for me, and then an Android client. So from go to woe, it took me about 2 weeks to write. If I was to have sat down and done 6 to 8 hours a day, it would have only taken me 2 weeks, which was quite cool. The other app that I've written that I've deployed up there called the Super Soccer Coach took me a lot longer. So again, I didn't have a lot of Android experience. I found a lot of the stuff that I needed on the web and community forums, and I could use my experience as a Delphi developer to sort of, build the infrastructure. I didn't have to go and learn a lot specifically about Android, and that was a real comfort when I was doing the development. Is this app on the Play Store yet? Not yet, my good friend, but I will make it available. It's actually, deployment is an absolute breeze. We'll cover that off in session 3. But I was so pleasantly surprised by the deployment process for Android and how easy it was. So let me just bring up this little guy here. Is basically the EMS development server. Okay, so if you have XE7 Enterprise or XE7 with a client server add-on pack, or you've got XE8 Enterprise or XE8 with the client server add-on pack, you get the EMS as a development server. The development server allows for 5 concurrent connections and allows you to do sort of all your testing to make sure everything's good. And so this is responsible for holding a couple of resources. We're going to talk about those resources in a bit more detail later, but I wanted to point them out. They're called the check-in event manager and the check-in email manager. So I've got 2 of those resources besides the inbuilt services the EMS provide. That's effectively my server, which is what we've got running here. And then what I've got is, we'll go and run it up now, our little Android app. Again, please don't go hating on my UI design capabilities. I am a man of logic and not of style or substance. So check me in is this little icon you sort of see down the bottom there. Someone said it was the side profile view of a cyborg. I happen to think it looks like a globe with a dot on it. Okay, so feel free to leave comments about my abilities to do UI design and icon development. It's not my forte. But if you've got someone that's really good at it, then I encourage you to get them involved as well and get them to have a look at it. So what I've got here is my login page for Check Me In. I've used styles on here to sort of give it a nice sort of shadow effect. With Android, I could add sorts of colors and whatnot. I just wanted to keep it quite clean. So what I'm going to do at this point here is I'm going to log in to Check Me In. And as I'm logging in, just keep an eye over on the EMS development server, and you'll see things being logged in there. Yes, I've purposely left the password open so I can actually see what's going on in there, and I'll hit login now. I've also got a sign up option so I can choose to add new users. These 2 things here are built into the EMS, so all I've had to do was make API calls. I haven't had to implement any logic for that. So you'll see down here that we've got some things that are being called here. You'll notice a privacy notice being displayed. This is part of App Analytics. So App Analytics is something I've dropped into this so I can capture some user metrics, or app metrics I should say. So it's just saying if I want this to happen, and I'll do that now, and I get my check-in page. Now the way this is implemented, and I'll talk about this in a moment, but this is effectively one form with a tab control. And I'm moving between the pages, which are effectively tab items. And what you're looking at here is something called the T multi-view. And from here, I've got an image list, which is holding those image icons for me there in the list box items. I can choose Check Me In, and I can put a value in there, and we'll put in, say, in the boardroom. If there's one thing I've missed from using a BlackBerry is its tactile keyboard. That's the only thing I'm going to say about that. The lat long there is being captured automatically by the geolocation component I've got, and I'm just going to choose to Check Me In. What's also going to happen at this particular point in time as well is that sent a push notification to everybody, okay, and just including myself for testing. So that little message box that's coming back is actually a push event that's gone out to Google Cloud Messaging and come back to let me know that check-in event's been created. I can also go and have a look at a check-in timeline, and this shows me all of my friends. I have one friend whose name is D. Bootsma, and I can see he had a test location there. I can go and see an interactive map of that, and D. Bootsma is somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, hopefully on an island just north of Tahiti. But this is sort of the idea of being able to grab those lat long values and publish them into this little interactive map, and I'll show you how we sort of hooked all that up. I can have a look at my personal check-in history, and I can see everything I've done there, including some Dutch words and some gibberish. So I've seen all those captured and the dates and times they were captured. I've also then got the ability here to invite contacts. And this is just simply going and interrogating all of my addresses and then letting me know. And I can simply choose one of these people. So if I go and choose, say, bootsmadamian@gmail, that's actually going to send an email to me to let me know whether or not I have that done. And that's now that email sent directly. And there we go, I've just received an email from the Check Me In administrator. We can go and have a quick look at that as well. So if I just sign out of that, we go into mail. So I go to my Gmail here. And you'll see there, me, join Check Me In. Again, I'm not the greatest at marketing here, so I've just simply said you should join Check Me In. I'll add something like because it's awesome, and that will be me done with marketing. So that's sort of an overview of the Check Me In app. So there is quite a bit of functionality in there. It's using some interesting technologies. And yeah, we'll focus today on that user interface aspect and how we've built that UI up. So I've got a couple of questions in here. There is a Check Me In app on the store. Oh, man. Oh, well, back to changing names. We'll figure something out. The Death Star. Yeah, just where Luke Skywalker punched a hole in it as well. So that's what the red is. That was also mentioned. Appreciate the feedback. Right. So let's jump into UI development and have a bit of a look at that. So I wanted to just cover off the UI design approach that I took because there are a number of ways that we can do this UI design. We'll touch on the multi-device designer and the multi-device preview. We'll look at the T-multi-view component, the T-image list component, T-map view, and then styles. All right. So the UI development, this is the particular approach I took. You know, for my mind, there's probably three ways that we could do this. We could go the traditional path of what we've done with Delphi, and that's create for each screen we'd have a form, and we could do a lot of construction and destruction of those forms and lay those out. The other option, and the option that I did in my previous Android app that I built, was I used frames. So I had one form, and then I had a bunch of frames where I did all my UI design, and then I basically had a variable called current page that I kept a track of, and then when I needed to change between pages, I'd figure out who the current page was. If it wasn't the one I wanted, I'd destroy it and then create the instance of the frame that I was after and parent it to my form. So I took that approach as well. For this one, I wanted to test out the approach of using tab control and tab items, purely from the fact of trying to minimize the amount of creation, destruction, potential memory issues that I might create for myself. But the idea here is that my app is solely based on one T form, okay? And within that T form, I have a tab control. My first tab control is basically for signing in or signing up, and it has a second page which is for basically the entire content of the app itself. And within that second one, in those tab items, I create for myself a toolbar and align that to the top, and I use a T-list box. Now, T-list box is fantastic for component or visual component alignment. It makes it really easy for me to lay things out. You know, in Win32 we had the grid, and that was what we used constantly to sort of lay out our data and so forth. What we find in the mobile space is the T-list box is a great way of doing that. And then what I do is I create T-list box items, and I put my components inside those. Now, you don't necessarily have to use a T-list box. You could simply use a whole bunch of T layouts and just sort of align them to one another. But what I find really useful with the T-list box item is it has a bunch of predefined styles. One of those styles that it has is this ability to have a label like its name, and then have a whole bunch of space to put my component into. But then it has also got an optional detail section where I can place some more information. You would have noticed that in my Check Me In app that I had a date field that showed me the date that I was when that Check Me In event occurred. That's being appended to the date. What I've also got as part of those those list box items is the ability to embed images to them as well. So everything that I need to lay out a component is available already inside the T-list box item. So why reinvent the wheel? A T layout might give me a little bit more flexibility with things, but for the way that my app is designed, the T-list box item was certainly good enough for that. So what we'll do is we'll lay that out and have a bit of a look at how that was sort of constructed. Cool. So I'll come back to that in a minute. Let's fire up Delphi. Let's go and start a new app. So I'll just close all. And what we'll do here is I'm just going to jump into this area here and create a new multi-device application. I'll do a blank app, okay? But you could go and choose from one of these predefined templates as well to give you a little bit of a head start. But we just want to sort of work our way up from the ground up. Now here, I've got my form and the current style is set to Windows. So I want to set that now to Android, and I'm going to be working in something called the master view. Now we're going to switch between a couple of these and have a little bit of a look at what this thing is. This is part of what we call our multi-device designer. So we'll touch on that as we're going through. So how was this app laid out? So I've got my blank form here, and within that blank form, what we want to do is we could do something like throw in our toolbar. Okay, so we can put a toolbar sort of up the very top here if we like. All right, and inside that toolbar, what we'll normally have is a label, and I'll grab that label here. It'll take on sort of the default style here, so we've got our style lookup value so we can determine what sort of label we're dealing with. But here we're dealing with a toolbar label. So let's use alignment to get that where we want it to go. Alignment, we want to make that AL center. Okay, you would have noticed as well what I've also got is I've got a T button. And I just want to point this out. When I throw the T button up into here, all right, and I align that to left, you'll notice that it actually stretches this guy across here, okay, and that will actually throw it out of center. So if you're going to have buttons up in your toolbar, what I encourage you to do is something like this. Go and grab a couple of extra T layouts, okay, and align each of those T layouts to the left and to the right, and keep them the same size. So I'm going to align one here to the right, okay. I'm just going to change the layout of this guy here to none for the moment, and then we'll fix that up. I'll go and grab another T layout here and add that over and align that to left. And then what we'll do is we'll drop our button inside our second layout, okay? And I'll set the alignment of T button to left. So what that's going to do is that's going to make sure that my label stays completely centered in that view. You may not put anything into here, but I certainly think that's a good way of going to sort of keep everything consistent. So you're going to use a fair bit of layouts. Also here, obviously naming those values to something that's a little bit more meaningful is also quite important as well. So there's our layout. What we'll do as well is we'll go and add a tab control, and inside that tab control we'll align that to client now. Okay, and to that tab control we're going to add 2 tab items. So we'll add 1 and we're going to add 2. Now this is where things start to sort of get a little bit interesting. So what you'll see there is it's already put those tab items up there for me, and I can see them quite clearly. Now I want to control what the user's actually seeing, and so by doing that I want to get rid of the tab item tabs or not make them visual. So we go back into our tab control. We come down here to tab position, and you notice that tab position is set to platform default. This is one of the nice adaptive design things we had in an XE7. But what we want to do is actually link this to set this to none. Okay, so that means that I've got active tab items. They're aligned to client, so the user really can't go anywhere except on these pages, and basically allows them now allows me to sort of control what they get to see and what they don't. The drawback to this approach is that you've got to set your active tab constantly to make sure you're doing the appropriate design and the design looks good. So just a little trap for players and how you might go about doing that. So that's okay. Let me just see what my active tab is. Active tab is tab item 1, which is cool. So what I want to do is to add to that, I want to go and add a T list box. So I'm going to add a T list box, and again what we're going to do to our T list box is we're going to align that to client. So again what we're trying to do here is make this sort of the focal point of this particular page. And to our list box we're going to add a bunch of T list box items. And again we're doing this purely from a layout perspective. Okay, so I've got a number of these in here. And so to each of these, I want to go back up to list box item 1 now. And in here, what we'll put in our text value is we'll say into here, let's call this our username. Okay, so I can make use of the label effectively within the T list box without having to use another label now. We'll make this one our password. All right, and what I'm going to do, actually I don't need 5. So what I'll do is I'm just going to right click on this guy here, edit, and we'll delete that one. So what we'll do is we're going to make this blank. This is effectively sort of a placeholder in between things. So the text value for this guy we're just going to leave as empty. Okay, and then down here again we're going to leave this one as empty also, because what we're going to place in here are a couple of buttons. Now again, what you may want to do here to make sure those are consistent is use something like a T-flow layout. So if I grab a T-flow layout and add that inside this, make sure it's in the right list box item, there it is there. Let's align that to client. Okay, so I've got my flow layout done. The flow direction is from left to right, so we could do that, or from right to left. We could say justify. Actually, we want the justification to be in the center. Okay, and we'll justify the last line because there's only ever one line, and we'll set that to center as well, which means I can go and grab a couple of buttons, okay, and I can add them to my layout, and now they're sort of centered for me, and it's a lot easier to work with now as well. We can go and add into here our edit fields, so we'll add our T edits into here, and we'll just drag those out a bit, and we'll go and grab the T edit from here as well and drag that out a wee bit also. So I've got the things that I need for my user interface. I've got my username and password, I've got my buttons in here, I've got these bits of detail, so that all looks really good, and I'm kind of happy with that. Let's just change our label here as well, just a couple of quick things on the label. We've moved something in XE7, so what you'll have with the label itself is something called text settings now, and within text settings you'll find horizontal alignment. We want to set that to center. We can change our font and so forth, and we'll say log in there as well. So I've got that set up now for my label. Now let's just check all this out, because currently I'm on a master view and my little Samsung S2 is a little 4-inch phone, give or take. So let's go into this view here and let's go to my Android 4-inch phone and just have a look at what that's going to look like. Okay, it looks okay. Okay, we can muck around with the button and so forth, but one problem I can see straight away here are these edit fields. They're actually gone right off the page and they're not useful to anybody. So we need to fix that up. And let's double check it, because I could potentially build this as well for a 7-inch tablet. So again, I'm struggling here with some of these views of things. And you know what I could potentially do here as well is provide a bit more spacing here. I've got all this real estate here as well. What I'm doing is I'm actually manipulating these views with something called the multi-device designer. And this is was introduced in XE7, and we've enhanced it in XE8 with something called the multi-device preview, which is again a really powerful way of looking at everything. So what I'm going to quickly do now is just make some subtle changes to these edit fields. Nothing major. What we're going to do is we're going to align both these edits to client. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing to here. Edit to client, but what I'm going to do is actually going to put in some margins, and I'm going to scale those margins back a wee bit. So if I go back into here and we go under margins, we want to set a left margin. I think it's to about 150. Let's have a look at that. Okay, so you'll notice that it sort of draws it back and it gets beyond this space here, which is kind of useful. And we'll do the same thing on this guy here. We'll set that to 150. And now if I switch back to my 4-inch view, that looks a lot nicer, a lot more consistent. Okay, same thing over there as well. Okay, so that's quite nice. Now what we can also do here is I can use my multi-device preview. So if I go into the view menu now, I can come down here into, where are we? This guy here, the multi-device preview, and I can open that up. And this is going to show me a bunch of different things. Now I'm doing Android development at this point. So what we can do is you've got the ability of being able to determine what devices you want to show. So I don't want the 4, I don't want the 5, I don't want that, and we'll hit done. So I've got the two things that I'm showing in my device view, and again we can make these a bit bigger. So I've got a quick and easy view of what's going on. So again, as I'm doing my design, I can have a look at the target platforms of the target devices really quickly and efficiently and make sure that they're all looking smick, and make changes as I can. And again, if you've got a dual screen monitor, drag it out and dock it somewhere else so you've got a better view of it as well. So that's sort of the multi-device preview. I digress. So I wanted to quickly jump back into here now, and I wanted just to sort of show you then sort of how I'm controlling the flow of things. So in my button here, I've got an on-click event. In my on-click event, all I'm saying now is, perform some logic. Okay, and then what we're going to do is basically go tab control 1 dot active tab is now going to be assigned to tab item 2. What I'm also going to do is, just to make sure, is tab item 1. I'm going to set to enabled is false. Okay, so all I'm doing here, instead of having to create a new form and change the form and check for the form, I've just got some simple logic now which simply transitions me between these different tab pages. Okay, so that's the whole idea of the structure of my page. So I've got the idea of a tab control on my form. Within my form, I'm using a tab control. On that tab control, let me go back to my main view. In my main view there, I've then got my tab control with my tab item, so I can go through. And if we were to run this up, and I'll just make sure that button's got all its code in there, it does. So if we run this now, okay, it's running up on Windows. Actually, that's a really good point. One of the other nice things we can do here is, if I'm just focused on testing the logic of my app as opposed to the UI, one of the target platforms we can do is Win32. So now if I hit this, it'll take me through to my button and all is good in the world, and that's what I'm after. I'm not so interested in the look and feel of it. It means I can run it up really quickly, I can debug the logic behind it, but as I'm getting interested more in then the deployment side of things, I can come into Android, under Target, choose my platform here, and click on Run. It was interesting, at the ADUG Symposium at the start of the year, Brian Long did 2 great presentations for us. His first one was on sort of, getting into the Android operating system, and the second one was on debugging. But the one thing I actually took most out of his Android development one was, the great thing about compilation within RAD Studio is it gives you time to contemplate. It gives you time to think. Like, did I put that semicolon on the end of that line? Did I make sure that I set the appropriate tab, and things like that as well? Just as it's about to run, you'll notice those things come up. So yeah, really good time to contemplate and think about things. Absolutely. So Nick Glazier suggested if you wanted a slide animation transition between your tabs, you could use a tab action. Absolutely. Again, making use of some of those standard actions that are part of Delphi as well is a great way of working. And yeah, certainly I encourage that as well. So let's have a look at our little app now. And again, looking very simple at the moment, but I have this sort of place here where I can sort of punch some information in. Again, have you noticed that as I'm sort of tabbing between these items, it's sort of highlighting the list box? It doesn't look that great. We'll come to that in a minute, but if I hit button 3, that'll simply take me over to the appropriate page. That all works really well, but what I don't like is how it's sort of highlighting each individual tab item, T-list box item. So we can fix that. So let's just jump back over to our designer for a moment, and let's choose our list box. And if I go back into the properties here, there's a really useful little property that we can grab, and it's called Disable Focus Effect. If you uncheck Disable Focus Effect, the minute you select an element or a visual component inside that list box item, it won't highlight the list box item. So it will just look like it's part of the UI. So disable focus effect, uncheck that guy and set it to false if you're using it for component layout. Cool. All right. So again, one of the things that I tried to shy away with, and I'm sure that most of you are doing this as well, is I wanted to just make use of a couple of patterns, primarily for reuse, primarily for maintenance, and just making sure that I have a really clean approach to the way I've done the development for this. So basically what I've got here on the server side is the end user will call an event at one of the REST servers, which will go to this thing called a resource. That resource has a REST event in it, which goes off to this object here called check-in event manager, which goes off to my data module and calls a query, and that query then goes off to my database to bring everything back. I've got these really clean, clear lines of separation and delegation of who's doing what, and I've done similar things on the client side as well. So on the client side, I have this approach where inside the frame, inside the form itself, there is nothing but sort of form logic, so setting things in and out, and I'll show you that right now. So if I come back into here and we go and open up, let's just save this project we're working on now because we're going to sort of come back to that. So we'll call this our webinar session, and we'll just call that Unit 1 and Project 1. Okay, so I'm just going to go back and reopen our check-in group. And inside my check-in group, I've got check me in, and here's my form for check me in. If I go and have a look at the login and open up login, you'll notice here, apart from the amazing comments and documentation I've got with this source code, you'll see here I've got this thing here called check me in security, called login user. Down here as well, I'm just enabling all my values. If I go and have a look at this check me in security, this is basically a class that I've got called T check me in security manager, and this guy here will basically perform some of those things like sign up user and login user. You go and have a look at login user, it's going off to my data module, going into the check-in users, which is a component, going to the users API and calling login user, providing it with a username, password, and a server-side object that contains any exceptions that I might have. And then I'm enabling the app analytics. So what hopefully you'll see inside my code, and particularly in the form, is that everything that I'm doing here is I'm delegating to another class. And when I do have logic, it's purely related to the visual components themselves, and trying to make sure that I have nice, clean separation between each of those things, between processing, between logic and UI as well. Oops. So I've showed you the multi-device designer and the multi-device preview. Really powerful ways of being able to look at your app, how it's going to look on those different devices, but also being able to do that sort of in a more coarse-grained view of actually having a list of those devices all up. One of the questions I also get is, can you customize the view? You can. You can add your own sort of custom dimensions. Again, when we're dealing with Android, we will have many custom dimensions. So you can keep that in mind as well, and make sure you've got those available too. So let's have a talk about something called the T multi-view. The T multi-view was introduced in XE7, and prior to this, this was actually a really cumbersome way. Without this, it was really difficult to do things. In my previous app, what I've actually had to do is create a separate form, and I'm handling all this animation and logic to slide this thing and slide it out, and also move the other component of my UI as well to handle all of this. The T multi-view is effectively a mobile menu. I guess that's the best way of doing it. It's effectively a panel that has some smarts built into it, and we typically use it to do this sort of multi-view designer approach, which is quite powerful. But in here, you've got a number of ways that you can display that. Again, going back to this adaptive design approach, where I can set it to be a drawer, which will overlap sort of the parent view of things or the content view of things. You've got a popover, which will simply display over it. You've got a drawer, which will push the view out, but then also shunts the content as well to the right. And you've also got docked. So you can choose from each of these. There's also a fifth option, which is custom, and you can also set it to platform default. So however the operating system behaves, the T multi-view will behave the same as well. So let's have a look at how we work with the T multi-view. So again, let's go back to our little app. Let's go back and reopen project 1. All right, let's go to our tab control and let's set our active tab here to tab item 2. Okay, so we can have a wee look at tab item 2. What we're going to add to tab item 2 is our T multi-view. Okay, so we've got our T multi-view here that we can add, and that will automatically sort of link itself over to here. Okay, so I can see my T multi-view. One of the things I want to do is actually want to be able to control the access to T multi-view, and the way that we're going to do that is through this master button property. And on master button, we're going to link that to button 1, he says. Yes, button 1. So button 1 will be the guy that's responsible for moving this thing in and out on our multi-view. So what we'll do with our multi-view then is we're going to add to that our T list box. Again, actually what we might do, we'll add the T list box. We'll add that in first. We'll add our T list box to that. So we'll add it to the multi-view. So it's part of that there. And we'll add basically our list of items that are going to be our menu for that list box. So we can add all those values in there. So we've got our multi-view, we've got our list box. Let's go and add just a couple more to that. And then what I've also got over here then is, what are we going to have? We'll have yet another tab control. And so we'll have a tab control here. And we'll set the tab control up. Again, because basically what's going to happen is for each of these list box items, they're going to be menus. And for each of those, it's going to drive it to me to a new page. So much like I had with my sign up and my content, I'll have that second tab control directing me to the appropriate tab items that each of these guys will direct me to. Again, it's just simply a matter of setting the active tab and then disabling the previous tab that I had enabled and setting it up that way. So we've got this here. We'll align that now to client. And then I can go and add my appropriate tab items to that as well. So I've got my multi-view in there and my list box. So what I can do is quickly just come back over into my previous project, again with check-in. I'll save that behavior. Just to answer a question. Change the view style to Windows. It will show you the multi-view as a drawer so you can more easily develop. Awesome tip, Scott. Thank you for that. So Scott was saying if I quickly jump back in, so if we go reopen this guy back into project 1, okay, and we go and set our style back to Windows, our multi-view will be available so we can go in and actually make our changes to it and set it all up. While we're here with our multi-view as well, you can then sort of see what mode it has, and it's set to platform behavior. So platform behavior for the phone is to actually then be a draw and send out and then push our content to the right as well. So we can set that up. Let's align our list box to client also, so it's nice and neat. So we've got all that set up now. All right, so let's go and reopen our check-in group and have a look at the multi-view we've set up there. So let's go into our tab control check-in, and under that let's go and set our active tab over here to check-ins. And then over here I've got my view of the world. So over here in my check-ins, I've got my multi-view, my T multi-view, which is displayed over here again. Let's bring that back to Windows so we can have a wee look at that. Okay, so I've got my little button for that. Within that I have a list box of my menu items, and I've got a little toolbar at the top of that as well. And then over on the right-hand side of this particular tab item, I have a panel. And within that panel, I've got my tab control. And within my tab control, I have each of the pages that correspond to one of those menu items in the multi-view. And the way that it works is really straightforward. In my multi-view under my list box for each item, if I want to go and have a look at, say, the map, I choose that, and in my events, I've got an on-click event. All I'm doing here is setting the active tab to the check-in map. What I'm then doing, because I've got to populate with a bunch of stuff, I'm going to go and get a list of all the check-in events. And I'm doing that through this class here called Check Me in Events, Get All Check-in Events. And I'm also including the user ID because I want to bring back everybody's except mine. Okay, so that brings me back, and we can have a look at this here. Basically a T object list of T check-in event. So what I'm doing then is I'm iterating over those, and I'm doing something called add a marker. We're going to come back to the T map view in a little bit later, and I'll explain what this guy does. But for each of those check-in events, I go and add a marker based on some of the details from the check-in event. And then I change the label for that tab control to say check me in map. And then I'm also then setting up the current location of the map to be my very first map coordinate. So again, I've delegated off to this object here to do all my processing for me. And in the user interface, all I'm really doing is setting the active tab and manipulating UI components. You'll see the same thing here for check me in now. I basically I empty out the edit field that contains any text in there. I set the label to check me in now, and I set the active tab to that tab item check me in. So it's handling all that behavior for me. If I go and have a look at this master button, okay, you'll notice that there is no code at all behind master button, because master button is simply responsible for just opening up and displaying that T multi-view. So we link those two things up and we start to get that sort of nice view of the world. So again, if we go back over into my app and we start check me in again, and bear with me as I log in. My typing is atrocious. Right, we'll log in. We'll say yes to that. So up here is my little hamburger button. Okay, I'm clicking on that, and that is just simply sending out my drawer, and that's then displaying my toolbar and my list of menu items. And each one of those I'm doing is then simply setting the active tab over on that side and basically clearing out that edit field and making it available. And so I'm just simply driving the user interface through these tab items and the T multi-view itself. So hopefully that shows you how easy it is to sort of set up the menu and construct that, and then simply have it delegate out to that particular content that you've displayed. So let's move on to T image list. You know, in the world of iOS, we really only have two resolutions to deal with. We've got our Retina display and our non-Retina display. But with the market segmentation of Android, we have many resolutions to cater for. We've got the really LDDI for really low and small devices, all the way up to XXX HDPI, which is for big tablets, 10-inch and above. So that's a lot of work to keep track of all those resolutions. So one of the ways that we can do that, and what we introduced in XE8, was the idea of the T image list. And that T image list is a central collection of images that we can simply add to. In each of the images that you add, it's effectively what we call a multi-res bitmap. And so within that, you've got the ability of being able to add the different icons that have the different resolutions, and then simply let the image list deliver the appropriate resolution per the device that you're dealing with. So there's a few smarts in there as well. You just simply need to load it up. Now, there are so many good websites out there that give you all these images, which I'm really thankful for, because my UI design is terrible. But what I've done here is I've got my image list here called Check Me In. Okay, I've just added that to my form. Double clicking on this gives me these list of images. Okay, I've gone and grabbed these from a website called Glyphfish. You can just simply go and Google free Android icons and the list comes up. Typically, these icon providers, all they want you to do is just to provide an acknowledgement in your app. So just on a help about page, just simply say icons by and put a URL in there, and that's enough to sort of use and license their icons. It's far easier than sort of reinventing the wheel, and there's a lot of things that are out there today for you. So what I've done is I've gone and added my list of images, which are just sort of along here, and I've done that by just clicking add, and then going into my res folder and pulling out the appropriate ones that I'm after. Okay, so I've set those up. As a side note, if you don't want to get user and you want to build your own, use Inkscape. Inkscape is really good for this. Would be cool if the VCL team just had the same functionality as the FMX version. Yeah. So hopefully we'll see that sort of move on, particularly in the case of what's happening with Windows 10 and some of the mobile devices and things like that. We may see that being moved over into the VCL. We've seen that with a number of other components as well, like some of the geolocation and sensors and so forth. So yeah, perhaps Scott will see that in a future version. So for each of these images that we've added, we get these source images, and I can choose one of these and double click on that, and that gives me then this view here. And what I can simply do here is click New, and then go and grab a new version of the one that I'm after. So I can come into the HDPI and add that in, and that will give me the appropriate icon that I can use for that. And so again, what's really nice about all of this is that I just simply collate this library of icons and I just simply associate it to my component. So how do we do that? The way that's done is really straightforward again. Because a lot of these image lists are being linked simply to my list box item inside my multi-view, if I choose the list box over here and we go to properties, I come down to images and I simply link this up to my image list. Okay, really simple. And then for each of these list box items that I have here, I simply come down into the list box and choose image index. And then from my image index, I then get a list of all those icons that are available and then simply choose the appropriate one I want linked to that. And at that point, at runtime, the images will take care of rendering the appropriate resolution dependent upon the device that's up and running. So it's very easy to sort of integrate those two things together. What was the site for the free icons and images? Glyphish, Glyfish. And I think there was another one I used as well. Just give me a minute. Where is my documents view? Users, developer, my documents, Android resources. The other one I had as well was this one, iconsforandroid.com. That was another really good one too, iconsforandroid.com. So Glyphish or these guys will give you some really, really good icons. Be prepared to sit down with a cup of coffee because they have loads and loads of icons. Really good though. Cool. So I know we've gone over time. Just a couple more things to talk about, and then we'll wrap up and then talk about our next one as well. So T-Map View was something that we added inside XE8. When we had the geolocation components introduced sort of way back in XE3, the way that we would demonstrate that was we'd go and grab a T web browser, we'd launch Google Maps in there, place a URL with the lat long values, and then we'd render that. But that was all we could really do. The whole idea of T-Map View is to be an interactive mapping experience. So what we can do with the T-Map View is you now have the ability of being able to do things like interact with it, like place in markers that you'll see here. So on here we've got these little markers and so forth on there. You've got the ability of being able to define rectangles and circles and areas on here. It's quite nice to sort of be able to work with. In particular with this app, I can start to plot all of my users. Again, working with the T-Map View is very straightforward. And again, one of the really good references to use here as well is in the DocWiki. So if I just jump into the docwiki.embarcadero.com, again, to sort of show you the sort of documentation that we're starting to bring out now. And if I come into here and I go into T-Map View, let's bring that up. Using the map component to work with maps for iOS and for Android. So you'll come down into here, and you'll get a list of what we need to be able to do on this. So on Android devices, I'm going to need to work with this Maps Android API. So we'll just bring that up. Okay. So you have an entire tutorial devoted to this, which is really good to see. So what we might do is, actually, I'm just going to sign in here. And this should give me a list of my APIs. Nope, not that part. Here we go. We'll open this guy here. So we'll need to go and grab that guy as well. Is that taking me to the right place, or is it taking me to the wrong place? No, that's taking me to the wrong place again as well. So this guy here. So the .wiki has all these details in here, and we'll come back to the deployment piece in a moment. Let's have a look at the team map view itself. So what I've got over here, again, very, very simple to work with, is I have my tab item called the check-in map, and on that I simply drop onto there something called the team map view. Okay, it just looks like a plain component that's aligned to the client. Okay, so in order to work with this, if I go back into my list box, so under my multi-view, accessing the map, we go on click. What I do here is I have this thing called map check-ins .add marker. So map check-ins is my, we go and have a look, that's my T-map view. Okay, so we've got that in there. I'm going to do something called add a marker, but there's so many other things that you can add to this, guys. Where you can add a marker, you can add a circle, you can polygon it, polyline, add an object, and so forth. So there are different ways you can interact with that. But adding the marker is actually going to ask for something in here that's a record type effectively. So what I do is I delegate that out to this thing here called check-in maps, called create check-in event marker. So if I go and have a look at that, basically what this does is this creates for me this T-map marker descriptor. If we want to have a look at T-map marker descriptor, okay, it's a record that contains position, which is a T-map coordinate, which is your Latin long. You've got your origin, you can give it a title, you can give it a snippet, you can give it an icon, and a bunch of other things as well. So we need to be able to create this record, but I'm mainly interested in just the position and the title of it. So if we come back into here, I'm going into create a map coordinate, and the create map coordinate just takes in my latitude and longitude from the check-in event, and that's what's going on down here. And then I'm simply specifying the title, which is just the check-in event name. Okay, and I'm returning that as a result that's getting plugged into my map marker. So that's going to happen each time. So that's the code aspect of it. The difficult thing with TMapView is actually configuring it, and this is the really ironic thing. In iOS, you don't have to do any additional configuration. You just deploy the map and it works fine. But on Google, we just have to enable an API. There's no costs here involved. It's just a couple of additional steps that we have to do. So if I just jump back into Google and I have a quick look here, it's still giving me the wrong spot. Where is it now? Let's see if this is the right one. This is the right one. Okay, so this is in my Google account. I've got my project here called Check Me In. And inside Check Me In, I just have to enable an API. So I come into my APIs, and this is basically saying, from Google's point of view, what are the things that you can do? And so under here, we've got Google Maps API, and here's Google Maps Android API. So I come into here, and I just make sure that's enabled. So that's currently on, which is great. So that part is done. The second thing I need to do is I need to create some credentials, okay, which is effectively creating a little certificate, which is over here that I've done. And so I have this credential here. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this credential and we're going to copy it into RAD Studio. So if I come back into my projects, go into project and options, and we go to application, no, where was it now? Users permit, entitlement, sorry. Under my maps service, hang on a minute, where is it now? Sorry, my bad, version info. Under version info, there's a thing here called API key. And I copy this value into here. And then I click OK. And that gets deployed with my app. Now there is one other thing that needs to occur, and that's explained here back in my configuring this application certificate. We need to use this thing called key tool, which is part of Java. And what we're going to do is we're going to create an SHA1 certificate based on your key store. And this is the value that you're using here. And what you're going to append to that is the name of your project. And the default is going to be com.embarcadero.project name, okay, where project name is your project name. That has to match, Okay, if it doesn't, you won't see the map being displayed in your app. So when I was actually doing the development, I had the app called a different name, and I went and changed the project. And straight after I changed the project, my map stopped working. I couldn't for the life of me figure out why. And it was because I changed the name of it. So I had to go back in and regenerate this SHA1 certificate. So a couple of questions. Clearing map markers is more difficult. You need to keep track of the markers you make and delete them for your list. You can't do it from the map component. Okay, so that's a good one to keep in that. So what I should probably have is just a private variable in there keeping track of all the things that I create, or at least store them somewhere in the database to handle that. So that's using our T-map view inside there. So the steps, again, you can find on the doc wiki, but basically what we do is we go through and create an API project in the API's console. We activate that Google Maps API. We go and get a key that we create, and that's based on the SHA1 fingerprint of your key store that you create using KeyTool, and also the name of your project. We'll then configure Delphi by, also the other thing is make sure that your app accesses the network state permission. You've enabled the map service entitlement, and you've added that API key in there. So those first two, let's have a quick look at. So for that, again, we go back into project and options. So the first one in there was under entitlement list, enable the map service. So we set that to true. And under users permission, we want to make sure that we can access the network state, okay, and also access the Wi-Fi state as well, okay. So make sure those guys are enabled with that entitlement, and map view will work fine. And again, all of that is covered off in these doc wiki entries. So let's finish up looking at styles very quickly as well, because at the moment the app is quite plain. And so I wanted to show you how I've embedded a style in here and how you can use that. So what we've got in here in my app is, when you notice when you ran it up, it actually had a style, but when I'm looking at it in this world here, it actually just looks rather plain. The way that we've done that is I have loaded the style up in code, so it still looks rather plain in here, but in my app it's handling it the correct way. So we go back to our tab control and we set our active tab over here to be authenticate so we can see what's going on. It does look quite plain. But what I can do here is come in and go and add a style book. Okay, so we'll go and add a style book here. So, and to my style book, I can manipulate this file name property. So I'm just going to go to file name, and I've got all these stored in my work folder. Again, for XE7 and XE8 users, part of your registered downloads are these premium styles. So go and grab them from the EDN and plug them in. So in here you've got FireMonkey styles, I've got Android, and let's go and have a muck around with, say, the Jet style. So Android Jet.style, whoops, Android. So I'll just copy that, and it's Android Jet.style. So we'll come into this guy here, we'll go into the file name, and again, this is purely from a development point of view. I'm already embedding this, and I'll show you where I'm doing that in a moment. Android Jet.style, and then I simply go up to my form, and I use this particular style book. And I go and choose the style book, and then I get the Android Jet style being used in my UI. Now I actually found with using the Jet style, when you're using black and white or grayscale images, it looks terrible. If you're going to use a style and you're going to use grayscale icons or images, use a really light style. Okay, it's so much better to look at your icons that way. So another question here. Can you show where to get them from the EDN? I couldn't find them. Very good question. So absolutely. What I'll do is just go to edn.embarcadero.com. All right, I'll just let that load up for a moment. And we'll go back over to here just while that's kicking off. So, and the nice thing is now once I've done that once, I can go back into this area here and go, let's have a look at Android Radiant. That sounds kind of cool. So we'll go back into here and we'll choose our style book, and we'll change the value here to Android Radiant.style. Okay, and again, once we've done that, that will then give me that radiant view. So it changes the buttons a little bit. It squares up these edit boxes a little bit nicer as well. So that could be a better one to use perhaps if we want to add a little bit of color and so forth. So you can add those things into it. Now what we've done is we've actually embedded this stuff in code. And so what we've got into here, before I do that, I've added a resource to my project. So if I go into my project down here, I've got resources and images. Under here I've added two. I've added a resource called Android Diamond and Android Jet. And each of those simply point to this style file, which I'm shipping along with my application. Okay, so I've just set those two things up. And in my code, when I'm actually kicking off my form create, what I'm doing here is I'm assigning this thing called a jet style, and jet style is a TFMX object. I'm saying tstyle streaming.load from resource, which is a handled instance. Android Diamond is the name of the style, and it's of type RC data, and that will give me this FMX object. And then I load up using the tstyle manager that style using setStyle, and that will then load that up at runtime for me. So I'm choosing between these styles. But what's really nice here is I could add yet another item in here where I could actually ask the user what style they would like to run the app as well. So they could be loading this in runtime. So that's just another thing to consider also with your view. All right. So the EDN is still loading. Who asked that question? Let me get back to you on that as well. I might send an email about how to actually go and access that, or even provide the URL to it for you guys. So just bear with me on that one. Cool. So that's what I really wanted to cover off today. And I do apologise for going over a wee bit, but there is so much to talk about, and I'm really, really passionate about this sort of stuff now with mobile development. Having built a couple of apps now, having sort of deployed one, and just sort of seeing how not complex it was. It wasn't easy, but it wasn't complex either. So hopefully from what you've seen today, there is a bunch of ways that you can set up your UI design, whether it's through forms or frames, or this particular approach would have controls. Using Listbox for layouts, using some of the new components like multi-view, which from my previous app would probably strip out 200 lines of code for stuff that I'm having to position on the form, which is really exciting as well. Looking at the styles, looking at the map views, looking at all those different UI views of the world. So with that, what we'll do is we'll come back next, hopefully in a fortnight. I'm on the road next week, but we'll tee it up. I'll make sure that everyone has the link, and we'll go through the EMS and wire it up to my UI. Always interested in your feedback, both positive and negative, on what you think of the workshop. So please email me directly or put a question in the QA box as well at damien.bootsma@embarcadero.com. We want to make sure the content we're delivering for you is relevant, informative, and yeah, I hope to hear from you soon. So I'll stay online for a wee bit to answer any questions that come through. But thanks for your time, guys, and enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers.